Joe and Mel, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Tell me a little bit about yourselves.
Absolutely, Andy. Thank you very much for having us. I mentioned I feel like we already know you from following you on Instagram, which has been great. So our story, the brief version is we have different backgrounds. Mel is a social worker. I was a teacher. Started a passion project, a fitness company out of our garage. We grew it and expanded. We started adding other things into our company and our business, and it got so busy that we had to realize that we were spending more time on our business than we were our family.
Mm.
And our family is a much more important organization. And while the business stuff was fun and great, and we learned so much through it that we now apply to our family, that we need to refocus. And during 2020 and everything happening, we went all in our family, moved across the country, bought a little cabin on the side of a mountain in Colorado. Our company still exists in upstate New York. And now we practice applying our family, those business organizational values to our family to try to elevate our kids much faster.
And just a little bit about us. We've been married for 16 years and we met when we were 14. And we have three boys, age 5, Everett, age 11, Henry, and age 13, Logan.
Very cool. Very cool. I like the bravery it took to move from upstate New York out to Colorado and just say we're going all in on our family. That is awesome.
It was a step-by-step process. We had never been to Colorado. We just picked a spot on a map. We don't know
Oh,
anyone
really?
here. Yeah, we didn't know anyone here. I had been here once to hike a few years prior in a different area of the state. We flew out here. We set up some houses. We looked at some school districts, which were critical for us, and just said, hey,
Sure.
where can we help our family have an experiential, skill-based upbringing? And went for it. And honestly, it's been a blessing in disguise to move to a place we didn't know because we got to reestablish everything from scratch. There was no external pressure on us to live a certain way.
We just wanted some place where it aligned better with our family values and some place that had way more sun than upstate New York.
Yeah, I bet. I bet
That
for
was
sure.
really important.
It is. That's awesome. So, at what point and why did you guys decide to start the Strong Family Project?
I'll go on this
Okay.
one. Yeah. So right around the new year is when we decided to write it actually down. We had a lot of pressure from business friends. I do business consulting in the fitness industry now, and they said, "Hey, we can run our businesses, but we really struggle with the stress of family life. Can you help us on that? And you really should start this podcast, and you should really get some info out there." And I didn't want to start it and kind of half effort it, to use appropriate
Yes. Yeah,
language.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
If
Yeah.
you get
Appreciate it.
yes. And so we took a little while to get it down and said, all right, now we have an opportunity to do the podcast, and we have a book written. That we had a family project to write a book for our children, which is a legacy project. I want to write down life's values. I gave it to them on Christmas as their present, and every day they have a little bit of a lesson from us to read. And once that project was done, now we're all in on being able to help others and teach.
And I think it's important to mention that we didn't just sit down and come up with it one day. We've been slowly doing the parts of our strong family path since our firstborn was born 13 years ago. So I think maybe in the last year or so, we realized that some of the things we do as a family kind of lay out into this path, this something that can be done in other families. It's not just kind of random. So we
Right.
have these 7 different pieces of it that we did sit down and organize it, but they've organically grown over the years. And now we've been able to write it down and hopefully help other families to get stronger through it.
Very good. And that's kind of how I feel with, being the secure dad. It's like I'm just sharing my journey and how I'm protecting my family, the things that I'm doing and finding other people who value those same things. So yeah, that really resonates with me. Joe, a minute ago you talked about having, your children having a kind of like a skills-based upbringing. So like how does improving your skill set as a family make you stronger?
I think it started when in the fitness industry, we'd have to do all these first aid certifications. And we moved out here. I went and got wilderness first aid certified and always trying to improve my skills. And something they teach you in all the classes is your biggest assets between your ears in any situation because it's your thoughts and your skills that you always have with you. Now, those items that you might have certainly support it and certainly make things easier, like having your med kit in your vehicle and things like that, support the skills that you have to be able to handle an emergency. We realize like skills aren't something that kids can inherit from you. It's not like wealth that you can pass on. It has to be
Right.
taught, it has to be
Right.
learned, it has to be practiced. And since I was a high school US history teacher for a while, it made sense to like, all right, well, where do we want to get our kids? And let's come up with a little curriculum versus just saying, hey, we want them skilled. Okay, well, specifically, what do we want? If someone comes to the door that they don't know, we want to see what they do. We teach it to them and we do dry runs on it. Like someone will come to the door and say, hey, I got to check the gas meter. We want to see if the kids answer or not. Like it's all practice. And so they're getting their skills and their confidence and skills from being resilient outdoors, which is big for us, or picking up archery, or just learning the skills of learning, being able to understand there's a frustration period whenever you learn something new and become better at it. We wanted the opportunity and just a reset button to be able to teach these kids from scratch on what we think that you should always carry with them.
And from my side of it, I really want the kids to be self-sufficient. And of course they depend on us because they're still kids.
Right.
But I
Right.
feel like at this point, and some of what I've done is I teach them how to cook and clean and some of those things that I'm better at. And now I feel like we could go out for a while and they'd be able to make themselves dinner. They would be able to take care of their 5-year-old brother. We have a lot of confidence in them because we've spent time teaching them some of these basic skills of living as well.
Very good. You talked a little bit about this, some of the skills that you guys have taught, and there was one that you said on a podcast recently, or I listened to it recently. I don't exactly remember when it happened, but you talked about being able to teach your kid how to like just move the car 10 feet forward or backward. And I'll be honest with you, like that was one that I had not thought of. I was like, oh gosh, what if, somebody gets trapped under the car? What if, moving a car 10 feet is something that's really useful? So, what are some of the other skills, beyond the basics that you feel like you've been imparting to your kids?
Yeah, so Mel hit a couple of there, being able to cook and make their own food. And that's a huge confidence builder. We look at it like, all right, well, how can the kids help us as parents? The reason why we call it strong family, it's not strong parenting because it's us as an organization, not what we do to the kids to get them in a certain way. But they're them building confidence through something like that. We do things called skills sessions, which are about 15-minute time periods where they can choose whatever they want to learn, but it's just focused learning. Henry usually picks soccer or learning like a soccer, kicking the ball up over his head. Logan will work on robotics, whatever it is, so that we're hitting their passions, but it is organized like, hey, if you want to be good at this, you have to have this structured learning around it. And we do skill sessions for it. We talked about moving the car. My father was a mechanic, so we had to learn it early on, a really blue collar mechanic, plumber, HVAC type neighborhood mechanic guy. And we had to be able to move the car. Like if he had his hands full or whatever, like he taught us how to plow in upstate New York. I think I was 12 when we were like, hey, you got to be able to run the plow truck as a skill. And that was huge confidence to me as a kid. Like, oh, look what I get to do. And my buddies don't have this. And it was a big confidence builder for us. We also teach them a lot of mindset skills on how to interpret situations. Like we don't call them chores. It's their opportunity to contribute to the household. When we work out together, it's not like, oh, this is going to be hard. Like, hey, this is going to be worth it. Like both things are true, but having the skill to pick the mindset approach is going to change the outcome. And so we do a lot of mindset skills too.
And the working out, I think this has been really important lately. Our 13-year-old, we want him to be more confident. So we work out as a family. So we're a family unit when we're doing it, but also he will oftentimes immediately say, oh, this is going to be so hard, or I just want to get this over with. So we're working on the skill of how do you talk to yourself? So something like, this will make me better. This will make me stronger. And we're going to start having him say it out loud, I think, before the set, because that really, you train your brain to think more positively. Or if we ask them, we read every day for 15 minutes. So we are becoming a big reading family. And sometimes they don't want to do that. Oh, I don't want to read. I'd rather go do this. And it's like, well, you get to read. And just the want to versus I have to, we say you get to do this thing. So just always kind of tweaking their mindset and how their perspective on what they're doing. So they see it more as a gift than as a chore. It's been really important for us.
Yeah, I think two more concrete ones, Andy, to share, like the car moving one to get out of the world of abstract mindset, is we want them resilient to weather. We do not allow weather complaining in our household. And you probably know this much more than I do. Like when there's snowstorms, there's that big one in Buffalo and people were freezing to death in their cars.
Right.
Like not too far from their homes. Like they didn't have the skill set to be resilient and handle the pressure of that situation. And so we do some cold water stuff. We have a cold water tub that we train, because I was told as young, if you touch cold water, you're gonna get hypothermia and you die. And
Right,
it's the
right.
shock of touching the cold water where that gets people that first 30 seconds because they don't know how to handle it and their body doesn't know how to handle it and they start hyperventilating. And if you get used to it and you like try it, it's, I'm not someone that's like, hey, you got to do cold therapy every day, but it's a skill to learn, is to be able to understand like, hey, this isn't going to kill me. I can breathe through this. Then I can self-rescue in situations like that, and being more resilient to temperatures and not being a fair weather person. Like, hey, it's snowing. All right, well, then that means we're going to stay inside. No, it doesn't. I mean, we're still going to live our life.
Well, two fun examples related to the weather. Years ago, so when we lived in New York, we had a pond behind the house. And for Christmas one year, we bought the kids this big floating foam mat.
Hmm.
And the water wasn't really frozen. And Logan's like, okay, I want to go try it. And my first thought is, it's December 25th. Like we're in upstate New York. It's cold. He
Right.
put on his swim shorts. He went out there. Joe got in the water just to make sure he was safe, obviously. But that taught him to not be afraid of the
Hmm.
cold. And then just the other day, so spring in Colorado oftentimes is snowstorms.
Hmm.
So half the day is snow and then the sun comes out and it all melts. But I think it was 2 nights ago, or even was last night. Joe and two of the boys went outside to play soccer. And Everett's like, it's so hot, even though it wasn't. He's like topless. They all ended up topless out there playing soccer with the snow on the ground. So they just are building that skill of not being afraid to be outside when it's cold. Because I certainly grew up saying you have to wear 15,000 layers before you head out.
Right, right. Yeah.
So.
And yeah, I get that. And that's really cool that you're teaching your kids to be resilient, that you're teaching them to be independent. And that's awesome. One of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you guys today, because one of the skills that I see you imparting to your kids is the skill of communication. And I think sometimes as parents, we don't necessarily know how to talk to our kids about certain topics or about certain things, or maybe we're just in an off mood. So, what are some of the things that parents can do to better hone their skills to be able to talk to their kids?
I'll briefly give the mindset, and then Mel can give the two examples: the evening debrief, or you have the floor, even the communication sticks. Mindset is being intentional, and like you said, Andy, it's how do we have the capacity as parents to handle a difficult conversation when we're gassed, we're burnout,
Right.
and so the mindset is lowest heart rate in the room. And
Mm.
that is just all, whoever has the lowest heart rate in a communication situation is usually the one that's going to be the most clear. And so repeating that in my head, like, all right, I'm going to keep my heart rate down. Like a child might be telling a 15-minute story about walking in the door. Like I might be like, all right, come on, get to the end. But I'm just like, all right, lower heart rate. I'm just going to sit through this, let them get all the way through so they don't view it as they need to rush. If parents are always cutting them off mid-sentences to get to the point, then they start rushing their speech and they have some stuttering patterns that come out of that. So I'm always lowest heart rate, lowest heart rate. Mel, where's the tactics?
I feel like we have a whole bunch because this communication is really a huge piece of every piece of our path. And I think the first one I wanted to talk about is the relationships in the family. So Joe and I make sure that we have really good communication. That's been a goal of ours since the day we got married. So every day, maybe starting a year and a half ago, our goal is to get outside for 30 to 45 minutes and take a walk so we can talk. And this could be simply something going on with work, but a lot of times it becomes about some kind of parenting issue, or I have a concern about one of the kids. So we get a chance to discuss it ahead of time. So once the kids are in front of us, we're not scrambling to figure it out. I don't know what he's thinking. Emotions are high. So we prioritize us having some private time together during the day, or sometime even in the evening or morning or whatever. We actually get up earlier now so we can talk in the morning before the kids get up because evening can be tricky, but
Hmm.
we've prioritized our ability to talk together. And we always oftentimes have a lot of humor with it. That's really important to keep things fun. Because if it gets
Sure.
too serious, it's just not
Oh
fun.
yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 And
um,
yeah. So I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead. But yeah, I
nope.
like to make my wife laugh, and I always like laughing at her. So that's really cool.
That's perfect. So the other thing we do at dinner time, well, we realized one of our kids especially was struggling with his ability to have a conversation.
Hmm.
So this is kind of a piece of communication. Like right now, you're kind of interviewing us, but when you're having a conversation, you want to make sure there's a really good back and forth. And he
Hmm.
tends to struggle with that. So we went on a walk one day and came up with this game we play at dinner now. So we have two cups. One has all of our names in it on popsicle sticks. The other cup has all different kinds of topics. And it's silly topics like rocks or windows or forks or girls, boys, whatever. It doesn't have to be anything big. And we simply pick one stick from each one, and you have a 2-minute conversation with a timer with that person only. So it helps them to practice that conversation, asking good questions, listening, and having that back and forth, even eye contact. So we explained this to them ahead of time and all the things we're trying to work on. And our 5-year-old loves it. Every night he wants to do this. Like we talked about spoons, I think, the first time, and it was hilarious. So it was just a way to make it more fun and not be punitive. Like, hey, you're not good at having conversations. We have to learn this. It was just kind of this fun way of doing it. And we can gently remind, hey, where's the eye contact? Or how about you ask a good question right now? Or how about you reflect on what he or she just said? Which takes me into the you have the floor concept that we use. And we learned this before we got married. We took a class before we got married, and one of the things they taught us was this you have the floor concept. So we had a literal piece of like carpeting or something, and you pick the topic of the day, and I get to whichever person gets to start. The person with the floor gets to speak what they feel about the topic. Before person two can respond, they have to first say back what they heard. So oftentimes when
Mm,
you're speaking, the
okay.
other person is busy with their rebuttal or with their
Yes.
opinion.
Yes.
They're
Right.
not truly stopping to listen to what the first person is saying to them. So I have the floor, I get to speak my piece. The other person has to say it back to me. And then if for some reason they didn't catch something quite right, I get a chance to clarify. Well, I didn't really mean that. This is what I meant. And as soon as I feel heard and understood, now I pass the floor to the other person and they get their chance to explain their opinion or however they're thinking about it. And then I respond back and they get to clarify. So it sounds like a multi-step process, but it's really just slowing down and making sure you're listening and not just busy with your rebuttal, especially if it's an emotional topic. So we've used that with the kids to kind of try to find compromise, try to find understanding, because oftentimes assumptions come in that aren't
Hmm.
true. So it kind of gives you the just a concrete way of understanding that assumptions can get in the way. And this can be a fun dinner time thing as well with it, whatever topic, just to practice it before things get emotional with an emotional topic.
Yeah. What I picked up on that, the whole you have the floor thing, which I think is really good, is everybody's going to get to have their say. Like nobody feels like they have to jump in and immediately have their perspective known by everyone. It's like, okay, well, this person has the floor at the moment. I'll get it in a minute and I can say my part. And I think that probably opens up more of the listening aspect that you were talking about. Have you found that to kind of be true when you guys have done this?
Yeah, they've been very good with taking their time, taking their turn. Active listening is the teaching term that we would always use. And another component of is active thinking. Like when you have the floor, we try to teach the kids, hey, think more and say a little less. Like you can slow down and get your thoughts out when you're not nervous about someone jumping on your toes or what they're going to say. Like you have that. You can pause for 10 seconds while you're holding it and then finish your sentence. And it is a more intelligent way for them to speak.
And
Okay.
I do think also just knowing the concept of you have the floor, when a topic comes up or I see the kids speaking over each other, I can refer back to it. Remember you have the floor? Remember you need to let this person finish their thought and then you can clarify. So it just gives them the concept. And then also in practice, obviously it's harder. You have to make sure that you can practice it often or whenever something comes up, you can remind them of it. And I think I forgot to mention the evening debrief though. So another way that we communicate, and this kind of happened randomly. So at bedtime, usually I put the 5-year-old to bed and I go over to my older two and we say a little prayer or read a book. And this is when they would often bring up the difficult topics from the day. Stuff that might
Hmm.
have happened at recess or
Right.
a friend said to them, or, my older one is adjusting to middle school. And these aren't necessarily topics that would come up during dinner. And I would always find that I'd get in there and all I want to really do is go to bed. It's late, it's 9:30 or whatever, 8:30 at night. But this is the time when they would be most comfortable bringing this up to me. So I would make sure that I would kind of swallow my selfish need to go to bed and be there for them
Hmm. Hmm.
and just kind of sit through it. And this oftentimes will be when, my one son will be talking, the other one's like, come on, get on with it. I want to get to the book. And I'm like, well, this is where we need to make sure he's heard. He's asking for advice, he's asking for help, and you can learn from this. So we automatically are learning how to communicate better. The kids are being heard. Because I think if I didn't take that extra half hour in the evening to hear them out, I'd be missing on like the meat of the emotional stuff they're dealing with during the day. Um,
hmm You know,
so
that's funny.
that's
That's one of the questions I wanted to talk to you about because I feel like sometimes as a busy parent, I don't like I hear what my kid says, but I don't listen to it. Like I don't fully grasp what they're saying. And it's funny because my son, I can, pick him up from school and he'll tell me about, oh, this happened, somebody threw up, that sort of thing. And it's all this kind of like superficial stuff. But man, when we get closer, I guess when it gets darker, maybe things get cozier, he starts talking about more things that are on his mind. It's almost like his his priorities shift a little bit and he starts talking about that more meaningful stuff at night. So and I like the idea of the evening debrief, but as the busy parent, what can I do to make sure that I'm actually not just hearing but listening to my kid?
I think if you I think it's being fully present. So one example is, whenever we have dinner, and Joe pretty much works up to the minute that we have dinner, and he knows as soon as we have dinner, turns off the work switch and he turns on the family switch and he's fully present. So when I enter that room and to do that debrief with my kids, to sit with them, listen to them, um, and read a book and pray or whatever, I know in my mind that's what I'm there for. I'm not going to let anything else distract me. So I think it's just a conscious choice on the parent's part. For the next 30 minutes, I need to be consciously fully here, even if you're kind of, even if you feel kind of checked out, or if they're taking too long to explain themselves and it's getting a little bit tedious, like Joe was explaining earlier. I think it really is just on the parent to flip that switch and say, I'm going to be here for you. Not say it out loud necessarily, but through their actions and not be distracted. Sometimes if I have a to-do list going in my mind, I text it to myself real quick and then I put it away. So
Oh, I
they
like that. Yeah.
recognize when you're fully present and when you're distracted. So I think maybe just being more mindful of being fully present in those moments.
Yeah, a couple things on that, Mount. I think you hit the nail on the head. Wherever you are, be there is the saying. And it's more important in a tech world, like wherever we are, we got to be there mentally, physically. The other piece of it is what Mel said with you have the floor is have to practice saying back to what you heard from them so
hmm
that they can have an opportunity to clarify in case you heard it wrong. It could be a fantasy story about dragons. Maybe you didn't get what they meant, or maybe they don't have the vocabulary to explain. It gives them a second chance to explain themselves. But the last piece of it's been very important for me is that when a child's confiding in you with a story or a gift, it is a piece of them and what they hold very important. And it might be a three-color circle on a sheet of paper, and you're like, oh, it's circles. But to them, like that is their creation. They don't have money or houses to give you. This is like they gave of themselves. They give of their stories. We have one son, Everett, that loves rocks. He finds this rock so beautiful. I'm like, tell me why, Everett. Like this is like
Uh-huh.
he found these things that it is his interpretation of what is valuable, and he's taking the opportunity to share it with me. And I want to make sure I honor that by listening and sharing back and hearing them out from that perspective of like they're giving of whatever value they have in their world.
And another example from just the other night, after dinner, I'm cleaning up, I'm washing dishes, and I just want to get it done. And this is when Henry starts to kick the soccer ball around the kitchen and start talk to me about something that happened at school. That's not superficial. So I could just say, hey, let's hold off and let's talk later. But honestly, if I say that, it's not going to come up later. He's going to feel
Right.
rejected. So
Right.
I make sure sometimes I stop what I'm doing, I turn around and look at him and we talk. Sometimes we just keep chatting because it's easier sometimes to have one of those emotional conversations and not be totally face to face. So we're both
Yep.
kind of doing our own
Yep.
thing. He's kicking the
hmm
ball, I'm washing dishes. But I make sure that I am present for him. And I realize that if I hold off, I might miss that opportunity altogether. He might not bring it up at evening debrief. The opportunity will just be gone. So it's kind of getting over yourself a little bit. And part of being parenting, it's very selfless.
Yeah, that
And
is
hey,
true.
we're always trying to learn. We've been talking a lot. What about you and your communication? You have any tips for us to
I,
cherish?
I'm one of these people that actually tries to keep what I'm communicating very brief because I think the more words you put into it, the more interpretation can be taken. Where if I need, something done right now, done this way, I'm only going to use those words. Maybe that's just a guy thing, but I think it's really, hey, let's focus on what's important And if we have questions later, we'll kind of talk about it. But one of the things I wanted to ask you guys, since you are the parents of 3 boys, I'm pretty sure you've had some conflict pop up at least once or twice. What are some things that you do to kind of help de-escalate tension in your household over, somebody fighting over, oh, that's my basketball, no, it's mine, that sort of thing? Give us some de-escalation tips for our family.
Yeah, I have one, and then I'll let Mel roll with it. I can tell she's ready to go. The biggest one is what we should do as adults too, and that's understanding you don't have to attend every fight you're invited to. And that's
Right.
what we tell them
Yes.
all the time. Like, you're picking on stuff that doesn't matter. And the second piece of that, and you mentioned it, Andy, is de-escalation is, okay, well, we're going to go to a different room for 15, 20, 30 minutes, half a day, and then we're going to solve it. We're not going to solve it when emotions are high. And we have family meetings intentionally for this, where it is our design time to communicate on these issues. And if they're having an issue, oh, this person's on tech time more than their 15 minutes allotted, this back forth. Okay, we're going to talk about it at the family meeting. 2 or 3 days later, all the heart rates are down, and you can have a meaningful discussion where they're not feeling like they're going to nitpick at each other. So my suggestion is to de-escalate it, to use that term like, hey, why are you arguing about this? You don't have to attend every fight you're invited to. This is not a critical mover of your life. And then saying, here's the time we are going to talk about it. Sometimes it gives them a little time to stew on it too. Like, oops, I shouldn't have been arguing about that too. A little reflection time.
Well, I like that you said that we ask them, is this worth your while right now? And I say,
Mm.
why did you say this to your brother? Oh, just to annoy him. Okay.
That's
So
honest. It's honest.
they admit it, or sometimes it takes a few questions till they get to that point where they admit they did it just to annoy him and there was no other reason. And then they kind of see, well, is that something that we're about? Does that align with our values, just to say things to annoy them? So we try to ask questions instead of just saying, knock it off. We try to ask questions so they can make the conclusion then that the choice they made wasn't the best. And one really practical one that we do sometimes is go outside and run around for 5 minutes, get some energy out. Because sometimes just separating the people, like my son Logan will oftentimes just put his hands on Everett. He wants a hug or he wants to tap him on the back, and he just sometimes needs to just remove himself and get some of those jitters out. So, hey, head outside for 5 minutes. And oftentimes just doing that, getting out in the sun or running around will just kind of de-escalate things quickly. Instead of simply just leaving the room or going to your room. I don't think that's really helpful, because something active is better, or we'll do a little mini workout or something.
Yeah,
Go
and
for a
I
walk.
think you get this, Andy, with saying less. It's like, hey, I can tell you're annoying him because you're bored. Do you want me to solve this boredom for you, or you want to solve it for yourself? And they usually choose to solve it for themselves.
Right. Right.
We actually had each of them make a board. So it's what you do
Okay.
when you're bored.
Uh-huh.
So if they ever are either bickering with each other, or if they're constantly coming and asking me what they should be doing, we say, go to your board. Go find something on that list of things that you could do. Because oftentimes it is that they just don't know what to do with themselves when they start bickering. But Joe mentioned something really important earlier about the family meetings and allowing the kids to come up with solutions. So recently, my one son kept staying on tech time too long, and the other son would always point it out, but he wasn't very kind about it. So at family meetings, we came up with a solution of they're going to go through me. So if you're worried about your brother being on tech time too long, it's not working when you point it out. That just makes things worse. Come to me and then I will go do that. So it was just this very simple solution that really solved that problem. So now my 11-year-old will come to me and he'll say, I think Logan's been on his computer too long. Can you go check on him? And then I check on Logan in my kind motherly way, instead of the brotherly way that can get very tense very quickly. And it just kind of solved that problem. But I think a lot of people don't rely on their kids for solutions. And we've found, I'd say the majority of the time, whenever we have an issue and we ask them for solutions, they have a lot of solutions. And secondly, when they are part of coming up with it, they are more likely to follow through with it, because
Yeah,
it wasn't like we just told them to do it.
simple communication sometimes is like, well, that's a you problem. Okay, I'm bored. Okay,
Right.
that
Yeah.
affects your life. How do you want to solve it? Using a lot of yous in the language, because it builds their confidence and resilience too, to learn that they can solve their own problems. I'm not just doing it to be sarcastic,
Right.
although I do enjoy being sarcastic.
Yeah, we
Oh
do.
yeah. Yeah. I get that. I feel you, man. I really do. So yeah, so one of the things that I really wanted to get from y'all was being able as parents to really listen to our kids so that when they tell us something like they're being bullied, they're having suicidal thoughts, somebody brought a knife to school, that sort of thing, that we will actually be present to listen to them, to understand not just the fun stuff, not just the, oh, hey, I found this really shiny rock today, I want to talk about it, but to understand those real critical times where there could actually be a problem or a threat to your kid, that you're there all ears for them.
That's an excellent point, and it is very serious, and they usually won't go right to that, just like
Right.
when you're saying. They usually say some hints around it to see if you're going to be present. Like Logan will say, like, the kids are a little weird at school. You can be like, okay, they're weird. Or instead of saying, what do you mean? Like if you pry deeper, then he'll start to open up and unravel, like, hey, this kid said this thing that doesn't align with our values, or this kid is doing this, or these kids the other day brought in gummies on 420 and they had to call the emergency room. They took these
Oh gosh.
marijuana gummies and these kids had a negative reaction. They had to get the ambulance there.
Mhm.
And like he's like, oh, something weird happened at school. What? And then you get to you get to learn more. Like that's something that we need to talk about as a
For
family
sure,
to
right.
make sure that you're secure and safe.
But first you have to make sure you have opportunities during the day for those things to come up. So like my middle schooler, we let him ride the bus to school because it's like 10 minutes, but the ride home is 45 minutes. So I pick him up because I think that's when a lot of trouble happens on the bus after school.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Yeah.
So, and not only to keep him from having to ride the bus, but it gives me a chance to say, Logan, how was your day? I can kind of, when he comes out of the building, I can kind of tell what the day was like, and we get to have a little bit of a conversation right away instead of waiting for him to get home and then we're all rushing with dinner. So it gives us that 15 minutes of a drive home to almost debrief after school a little bit. And sometimes nothing will come up, but sometimes I'll sense something wasn't quite right, which might come up later in the evening. But it just gives me a pulse on how he's doing. So I'm listening not only for his words, but I'm listening for his body language, how he's behaving,
Yeah, right.
and just kind of be cued into all that because each of our kids, as I'm sure parents know out there, they're all different in how they show you when something's up.
Yeah, and if you're not paying attention because you talked about, the body language, those nonverbal cues are so important with kids. Yeah, that's a really good point. And Joe, you were talking about, something weird happened at school. Well, that could be, oh, there was a lizard in the classroom, or somebody
Right.
fell and broke their arm. You don't know what's coming,
No, you
after
don't.
that sort of thing.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
the other thing I think is not overreacting. I've had to work on this. So a kid comes in the room and they've got a bloody mouth because they just fell and their tooth got knocked out because that's happened.
Right.
And I kind of, my initial reaction is usually very outward, like, oh my gosh, what happened? And I kind of panic. And Joe pointed this out to me years ago, and he's like, you got to tame that. And I've been able over time with practice to, even though inside I might be kind of freaking out, I try to keep it real calm on the outside. And then they will, like we talked about cues a minute ago, those outward cues, the body language, they will stay calmer because you're calmer.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I know you've spoken on this, Andy, from what I've listened to, is like panic never helps the situation. You have to have a clear mind to do these things. And I learned this early on when I was running our fitness facilities. We were training athletes, and we were training a swim team, and the coach happened to be the first aid CPR coordinator and dedicate his passion to be able to respond to things. And a whole swim team, kid walks in, just falls over, breaks his wrist right in half, just like walking. And he was so calm about it because he's like, hey, if I panic and there's all these kids around us that now start panicking, it's going to send him into shock and make his outcome way worse when we panic.
Right.
And I remember that moment very well. He's like, yeah, just grab some newspapers, we're gonna roll this up, call the ambulance. And like afterwards, he's like, it's like having that vent as a parent, not in front of the child, but like let your outward reaction out, just not at that time. Like give yourself some time to breathe, and so you can focus and work through these situations, these very serious ones, like you're talking about.
Right.
And this makes me think when something happens with one of the kids, oftentimes they'll talk to me and then I'll like run to Joe and we'll kind of have to laugh about it in the background because I have to debrief myself. We need that time on the walk or whatever. I visit him wherever he's working in the house and I'm like, I need to get this off my chest because I hold it in when I'm with the kid potentially. And we just try to always laugh about it because it just brings us to the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. So, laughing and, when you've had, trauma laughing at the appropriate time is always a good thing. So guys, as we wrap this up, is there a story that you guys have about how, your communication skills really helped, your family either through a tough situation or a time of crisis? Is there something that stands out to you where you thought, man, we really mitigated this problem because we were able to communicate so well?
Yeah, I'll go with the big picture one, which was our decision to move here. Like things were not good during we owned rental. We always lived below our means with our financial approach. We bought a house, we rented out the other half of the house, we bought a couple of duplexes, and then 2020 happens and we're in the fitness industry in New York. So we're locked down for like 9 months. I
Ooh,
have
right,
employees
right.
that we kept on and paid the whole time, and everyone stopped paying their rent, and we had to pay the mortgage because they had a rent moratorium for almost 2 years in New York. So my business was closed, schools were closed. Now the kids are home. We opted to homeschool the kids for the next school year because we didn't want them doing virtual learning all the time, because it didn't align with our values. And there was just so much stress, and like everything could go wrong. But we would take our walks, we would communicate, and we would just repeat, "Hey, we're going to control the controllables. We're going to take this one step at a time." Even the move, it's like, all right, what's the next thing we need to do? Let's go. Let's research some states. Let's see if what we assume is true, that they will have more opportunities to be in school. And we did move. They did get back into in-person education here in this state much quicker. And so we had to find a place aligned with our values, but it was just like, all right, one step at a time. And that's all we would talk about. We'd focus on it, and then we'd question our assumptions, and having those communications and talks, just walking and talking to let all that outside pressure not influence our daily communications, because we couldn't control all that. I couldn't get gyms open faster. I couldn't make the rent moratorium go away or any of those things, but we could only communicate on what we could solve and move forward together. And that led us to where we are and running our Strong Family Project and a lot of other great things.
And that at that time when things were kind of crazy, that's when we started doing family meetings to
Okay.
help our kids understand what step we were on. It's
Hmm.
like, hey, we're moving. Hey, we need to put the house on the market. So, and we had, I was homeschooling, so we had this whole system of we got to do a house showing, so we got to put all this stuff away, and we all worked together. And one really specific example that stands out in my mind is my middle son was very unhappy about this move. Kids oftentimes they can't see the big picture. They can't see all the
Sure.
benefits. They
Sure.
only see what they're losing. And he really wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't hug me. He was taking it very, very hard. So I had to make a really important decision to not take it personally. So I started leaving him little love notes in his bedroom. Just I would hide them in the room. And the first few times he found them, he tore them up in front of me.
Mm.
He was so angry. But eventually he started to appreciate them. And maybe a month or two into this, I would ask him, is it okay if I hug you today? And one day he finally let me do it. But it was really the ability to not take it personally. I knew that it wasn't really about me, it was his way of processing this big loss, because it really was. And just patience with it and creativity. Because my older son was like, yeah, let's do it. You know what I mean? Like he didn't have any problem with it. And I could have very easily gotten upset with my middle child, but I had to step back and just find a creative way to stay connected with him despite the difficulty. And but the one step at a time that helped us, and that was just how we had to do it, one day at a time, one step at a time, and just keep everybody's needs in check.
Sometimes communication just doesn't happen on our schedule as parents, and we just have to accept that. It's when they are ready to talk, like you mentioned, the evening time when they feel most secure in their own little den of their room and things like that. Like, yeah, maybe it's something I want to talk about now and nip in the bud, but it's just not going to be a good outcome. So we just got to be patient with our communication.
Mhm.
Very true. Very true. Guys, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really do appreciate it. Tell everybody where they can find the Strong Family Project online.
Well, first, Andy, likewise, I love following you on Instagram. So I know we're supposed to go on and like talk about our stuff, but talk about your stuff. Like your your Instagram is awesome. You're always posting things, so we really appreciate the Secure Dad.
I appreciate that.
For us, it's the strongfamilyproject.com. That's our hub. You can download the 7 steps of the path, these critical components that you can apply to your family over there. Yes, we're on Instagram, but you can find it all if you go to strongfamilyproject.com. You'll see the podcast that we just started about 6 weeks ago, and how we were able to meet Andy and meet so many cool people. So we really appreciate that, and hopefully we can meet some more cool people over at Strong Family Project.
Very cool. And you tell me a little bit more about your podcast too, because I mean, I listen to your show.
I appreciate it. Yeah, we launched it about 6 weeks ago, and it is picked up a tremendous amount of steam. I think, you know, from the business consulting world, a lot of the gym owners needed it, and they already knew them, so they already started sharing it with their families because there's any business owner needs a little bit of clarity in their home life. But we took our time to come up with what we think are the critical 7 steps of having a strong family. That includes establishing your core values, what to do at a family dinner, evening debriefs in there, morning routines in there. And we don't tell people what to do. We just say, hey, here's the 7 step framework. Here's what we do. And it's important for you to be intentional and choose what fits for you, your values, and your unique situation. And if you have clarity on those things, it eliminates a lot of confusion during the day. So we want to help. Honestly, we feel that it's just wrong that parents are thrown into being a parent and have no education or support on it. And they're just like, hey, be a good parent. That's pretty vague.
Well, what does
Like
that mean? Yeah.
yeah, that's not great education on how to run a family, which is a critical component to this world.
Yeah.
And so we want to share what we've learned, share what's worked, what hasn't worked, be transparent, that we are certainly have room to grow, but here's what we're working on right now. And if more people spend more intentional time, it's going to lead to very positive outcomes for their family and for their own lives, because they're feeling burnout, feeling frustrated. They don't feel like they have time to communicate because it's so much to juggle at once. And if you have a little bit of a system strategy around it, you can make it happen. And the outcomes are just amazing.
Yeah, the first 7 episodes cover those 7 pieces of the path. And then every episode after that is whether it's a parenting tip or a communication tip or something that's on our hearts about families, because it's not just again about parenting, but it's really about the whole family as a unit. But they always relate back somehow to that path. So if you're going to make a decision about something, you have to have your values set up or et cetera. So the first 7 are kind of the core foundation, and then the other ones flow from that.
Very cool. Well, guys, thank you so much. And, best of luck on the rest of your path.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much, Andy.
It's great to meet you.